I'm Leah Boleto and this is the Sky News Daily. It's Tuesday evening and we're back outside the High Court in London because today is the day Prince Harry started giving evidence in his case against the Mirror newspaper group. It's the first time in 130 years that a royal has appeared in court, and it's fair to say it's been pretty explosive.
You're right.
We've also had his full witness statement, more than 50 pages of it. In it, he describes the behaviour of the tabloid press towards him as utterly vile, and he blamed them for inciting hatred and casting him as a thicko and a playboy. Now, the court rose for the day a little while ago, and the street outside where we are right now is, well, it's the quietest it's been all day. We've managed to grab some time, though, with our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been quite a day, hasn't it, today?
Oh my God, it's been completely bonkers. Okay, let's just boil this down a little bit. We have Prince Harry, who is the son of the king, coming to testify at the High Court. This just doesn't happen. We've been talking, haven't we? The last time it happened was back in 1891. Edward VII, then Prince of Wales, came in, testified for 20 minutes and then went off again. Harry has had a whole day of cross-examination and it has been rigorous. We always knew it was going to be. That is the point of cross-examination. But it has been an intense experience for him. And I do think that he has kept his cool throughout the day. And if the Mirror barrister was hoping to goad him, to sort of prod him into saying something he perhaps didn't want to say, he didn't quite achieve that.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because we had this lengthy witness statement. You're holding it.
I have it.
I mean, it was his chance to put his side of the story out there, wasn't it, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, come on, there'll be a lot of people who said, hang on, we've heard Harry's side of the story repeatedly, haven't we? We've had a Netflix docuseries, we've had a memoir, we've had interviews galore. But I think what this does, which perhaps we haven't heard from Harry, all 55 pages of it, feels more like a manifesto, because remember, there is a purpose to Harry coming here today. He could have settled, we know he's chosen not to, but what he wants to do and what he calls his life's work, and this is very much part of his life's work, this is perhaps chapter 1, is make some real change. He wants to bring about change. So he is setting out his stall here. You've got the 33 articles that he's talking about. They are drawn from thousands and thousands. These are the most compelling ones, basically. All instances where he says his private information, bits about his private life, were hacked into, and that resulted in the article. And hacked, by phone hacking, by blagging of information, private investigators, all of that kind of stuff. He's got to go through all of those, which is what we've been hearing today. But there is, at the end, you get more of a sense of where he's going with this. He says the British people deserve to know what was going on. That is what he wants to achieve here. So aside from what we've heard, he obviously wants a win. It's not about the money for him. He wants to bring about some change, to hold those he believes are completely responsible.
But he has a hard job, doesn't he? Because he has to prove that those journalists use unlawful methods to gather that information, to publish those stories. How tough is that?
Yeah, it is tough. So look, let's take a story, for example, Beach Bum Harry. That was about his gap year in 2003. There were some bits of information in that story that Harry wasn't very happy about. The Mirror Group said, well, okay, but hang on, we weren't the only ones publishing this story. There were statements coming out of the palace saying that things were going a bit wrong. You weren't liking the kind of constant press popping up and people taking your photo, etc. It wasn't just us. There were other articles. We were getting our information from legitimate sources. And Harry has to try and prove that, no, you were getting it illegally. And that was the tricky thing, I think, in some of these instances. I think there was a smoking gun moment when he was talking about flight information. So Chelsea Davy, his ex-girlfriend, features in more than a third of these articles, his relationship then, which ended up, they split up because she decided royal life wasn't for her because of this amount of press intrusion. And the fact that his private flight information popped up in an article, he says, look, this is a red flag. Security, my travel arrangements are never mentioned about. I don't talk about them because it is kind of sensitive information. So that was the moment where I kind of thought the Mirror barrister was more on the back foot when it came to his sort of questioning, well, we can get our stories from other sources if you like.
So this witness statement, 55 pages long, yeah. Sky journalists have spent the day kind of picking out big moments from that. Can we go through some of those? Because at one point, Prince Harry, he really does hold the tabloid press responsible for a lot of the difficulties, I suppose, in his life. And in particular, he points the finger directly at Piers Morgan.
Yes.
who was editor of the Mirror back then, and he mentions him by name multiple times. What did you make of that?
Yeah, he does. Harry has said all along that he believes that it wasn't just the journalists who were engaging the blagging methods, these unlawful activities, but it was the editors who knew it was going on, and in some cases, not just knowing it was going on, but commissioning it, asking for it to happen. These are the editors, including Piers Morgan, that he thinks should be here giving evidence. These are the editors he wants held to account. And Piers Morgan, I'll give you one example, basically. He says the reason he feels Meghan's been vilified and demonised so much is because Harry's bringing this case. He says that him and Meghan have been subjected to a barrage of horrific personal attacks and intimidation from Piers Morgan as a consequence of him bringing the Mirror Group claim. So he's levelling some pretty big accusations at Piers Morgan, who has always denied any knowledge that this was going on.
The other one, Laura, Prince Harry talking about actually how all relationships in his life were affected by this press intrusion, this unlawful gathering. It caused tensions between relationship with friends, and he thought actually they're leaking stories about him. So just setting up the stage that every part of his life, from a young boy, a teenager, right through to his professional life, was hacked.
Yeah, he said nothing was off limits, didn't he? I mean, yesterday we heard how nothing was sacrosanct or out of bounds, but I feel that despite the fact he had this huge privilege of growing up a prince in palaces and the like, he had nothing when it came to privacy, that there was this real blurring of the line when it came to what was in the public interest and what people were interested in. And he said the papers crossed those lines basically by kind of feasting on negative stories about him, which people wanted to read, and it fueled that kind of situation where the press would then do everything they could to try and get more information, because those were the stories that sold their papers.
The other one that was stand out for me was the fact that he was worried that he'd get booted out of Eton because of stories about drug taking. You know, as a young boy, that would have been tough.
Yeah, definitely. The drug taking was a big issue, or a bit one of the big stories that came up today. A lot about his time at Eton. I mean, there was this agreement, wasn't there, when both William and Harry were at Eton, that they would be left to kind of have a childhood, grow up as teenagers at secondary school. And there's a sense, isn't there, that just didn't happen. And we heard a story about Harry's back injury, so he couldn't play rugby and the like, that he wouldn't, he said, have given out information that his doctor had told him. He didn't want, to talk about his friends with those sorts of details, and he certainly didn't want his friends to view him negatively. And this was the kind of intrusion that was constantly going on.
But when he was cross-examined by the Mirror's lawyer, Andrew Green QC, who actually, he has a bit of a reputation apparently, he's known as the Beast by his colleagues, he had these 3 lines of attack that I'd really love to go through. So the first one being the fact that actually many of the articles that were published, Harry wouldn't have read or didn't read because he was very young. So that was the first line of attack. What did you make of that?
Well, I think what he's trying to say was, if you didn't read the article, how did it cause you any distress, basically? So was it really invading your privacy because you didn't know about it? And Harry's saying, well, actually, I might not have been reading about it, but people I know did. And when it comes to school, all my mates were reading about these articles and they were judging me about them. And even at Sandhurst and the like, he sort of said he'd walk into a room and kind of, what were people going to think of me? They sort of had a prejudgment when it came to him because of all the stuff that had been written about him.
And then the second line of attack was that actually this information, well, it was already out there. Other newspapers published it. And so how could it really have affected you if it was there?
See, that's the tricky one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you could say, well, it's popped up in the Evening Standard or in the Telegraph, the Daily Mail, what have you. But I think what Harry's team have been trying to prove, that even when other newspapers had stories, so Harry dressing up as a Nazi, the classic, that was a story in The Sun, wasn't it? Or News of the World, one of the two of them. Anyway, but either way, what the Mirror Group would then do is try and use this illegal kind of information gathering to get their own lines on the stories. So it might have popped up somewhere else, but was it using extra information, extra details that there's only one way they could have got their hands on, and it's not a lawful way?
Yeah, and then the third line of attack is saying, actually, Prince Harry, you were just embarrassed by the fact that stories about alleged drug taking had taken place, not the methods used.
Yeah, I mean, I think Harry will be the first to admit he's done a lot of stuff in his childhood that he isn't proud of. I mean, the drug taking is a classic example there. He's spoken about it ad infinitum in interviews, in Spare, all the drugs he's taken, hasn't he? And he's always known that there'll be a huge amount of interest in what he gets up to. But again, it comes back to that point, it is illegal, obviously, the drugs he was taking. But he had this extra pressure, this extra scrutiny on him because of his position, and there was nothing he could ever do without someone finding out.
And so with that in mind then, Laura, what did you make of his overall demeanour in court? Because there were a few, court etiquette issues that happened,
Yeah.
but did you think he was in control?
Yeah, I think what could have happened today didn't happen, and that's Harry got rattled, he got riled, he exploded, he went down some tricky rabbit, dug himself all sorts of holes. He, I think, towards the end, seemed a bit more in control. He seemed measured, he seemed quite calm and pretty confident, I think. I mean, he was sort of talking at one point directly to the judge, which doesn't happen. You don't do that, but I think that will be, just because he's in a weird situation. But I think you have to remember that he is on his own in there. It is packed, but he is on his own. His legal team won't be talking to him now. And until he stops giving evidence, that will be the case. So they can just sit there and watch, and there's nothing they can do. The words that are coming out of Harry's mouth now are his words alone.
But we're not used to members of the royal family having opinions, because he did at one point say that, the press and the government are rock bottom. That was quite, I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been tricky, hasn't it? The opinion, how political do members of the royal family get? Because the king, is a well-known critic and outspoken on several issues, and many have said he's crossed lines in the past. But yeah, Harry kind of was quite explicit with that, talking about the government hitting rock bottom. But Harry says what he wants to say, doesn't he? He always has done. You wouldn't get William saying that. You wouldn't get William in court, because he settled, didn't he, in another case. But Harry is a different kettle of fish when it comes to what the royals do.
And the royals, I'm sure, will be watching, because it's not just Harry at stake here. It's mentioning the late Queen Elizabeth II and the fact that she sent a private secretary on his break in Australia, King Charles too. So they will be watching with vested interest, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we said yesterday, didn't we? The king conveniently isn't in the UK at the moment. He's in Transylvania, as far away from this as possible, bird watching, whatever he does, painting. They will be informed and updated without doubt in terms of what is happening here. I think probably with the royal family there is always a sense Harry's going to do this anyway, there's nothing we can do. William will not be happy about kind of these private conversations being talked about again, being dragged up again, particularly given the fact that the brothers have had such a falling out in the past. And it will be difficult for Chelsea Davy too. This is quite a long time ago for her. She's married, has had a baby, she has a whole new life now, and it'll be hard for her having all this dragged up. It probably wasn't much fun for her back in the day either.
So lastly, can you talk me through what we are expecting on Wednesday, and then actually when we hear back from the judge on any kind of verdict?
Firstly, Wednesday we'll see more of the same, basically. So another half a day of cross-examination for Harry by the Mirror Group barrister. So that will cover the other half of the 33 articles, and then sort of Harry sort of summing up, I guess. He'll try and get across the bigger mission in this. Do not expect any kind of ruling anytime soon. The judge will be really going through everything, because you've got a senior royal here making some pretty big accusations, and if he finds in favour of Harry or doesn't find in favour of him, he's essentially accusing Harry of not telling the truth in some ways, isn't he? So he's going to have to weigh it all up. So in terms of what he finds, it will be, I wouldn't even have thought it would be weeks, it'll be months before we find out.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time, Laura. I know you're a busy woman, but we appreciate your time on the podcast. Thank you.
No problem, thank you.
My thanks to Laura and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Leah Boleto. This episode was produced by Rosie Gillett with Sydney Peed. Our editor was Paul Stamworth. And just to let you know, there's a special Sky News programme on TV at 9 o'clock each evening reflecting on the day's court proceedings. So if you're listening after they've played that out, you can watch it back on our mobile app and YouTube channel.